Welcome to another episode of the Capacity Podcast. I'm here with Rhys Anderson from Method MFG. They're a precision aerospace company located outside of Austin, Texas. Welcome.
Good to see you.
You have a very interesting background. You're a wildlife firefighter. You studied architecture. You have a very diverse background. How did you get into precision manufacturing, and how has that background helped you see things differently?
I kind of got into it randomly. Originally, I'd kind of always been interested in it. I grew up in a shop back home in Montana. My family had a sewer business. We built most of the equipment for the sewer business, and then that business also translated into contracting equipment to the government. So over the winters, when the business wasn't as busy, we'd work in the shop, we'd weld, we had manual machines and stuff like that. And then I had a neighbor across the street that made competition rifles. So I kind of had like a good overview of manufacturing. And so I just knew I always liked to make things. And so that was kind of the impetus of how I got interested in it.
What makes a competition rifle? The barreling is like super precise or something?
Yeah, the barreling, like the chamber, they're just very precise. And so that was kind of the first time I'd seen something like that, where you're taking, like when you're welding something, you're not changing the form as much. I mean, you're cutting material, and we had like iron workers and that kind of stuff, but like we weren't taking like raw blocks of material and turning it into a totally different thing. And so for me, that was just really interesting.
Was that manual work? Was it?
No, he had CNC machines over there. And then at like our shop, like every once in a while we would like turn something down, but it wasn't like anything super intense. So, but yeah.
But then firefighter first.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so the government contracting was firefighting, and so that was just kind of the family business. And so when I turned 18, like it was kind of expected that I would start fighting fires. And so I worked my way up to engine boss, and so I would take out a crew. We'd go everywhere from like anywhere in Montana to California, and yeah.
What prompted you to stop and move on to something else?
For me, a lot of it was like, I met my now wife. I was kind of starting my career. It was great for me to get me through college. And then, as I was, figuring out what I wanted to do, I really enjoyed it. It was a super fun career, but you'd leave pretty much, May, and then I'd be gone until September. And so, the wife was not super into that.
Yeah. But you also studied architecture too, and didn't pursue that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I came from a super small town in Montana. I don't think I ever met anybody that even knew an architect, but for me, I was really into art and design. And so I started out in business, and I was going to take over the family business. And then I kind of decided, that wasn't going to be the direction for me, that I wanted to like leave my town. So then I was like, I'll do art. And then as I was, doing art, I was like, I don't really see how this is going to translate into a career for me. And, architecture, in my mind, not knowing any architects or anything about it, I was like, there's a career path for this. It seemed like it fit like things that I was interested in. And so I just kind of like, that's the direction I'll go. And, as I was going through the program and then talking to people that were actual architects, I kind of started to realize that, my idea of what the career was like wasn't what it was actually like in real life, and that I actually was more into designing, products and making things, and that wasn't going to be what architecture was like. And so I transitioned from finishing my undergrad in architecture, and then I went to product design school in California. And then kind of a similar thing, I got into this program. I was super excited about it. And then I started talking to my professors, and, I was looking at like how much time I'd have to be in, and like what the career path paid, and what kind of things I would be doing. And I'm like, man, this doesn't really seem like it pencils out. Like, and so at that point I was like, I don't think I'm going to pursue this. And so that's when I dropped out of graduate school. And then, my wife and I, we were dating at the time. We were kind of looking for, okay, where's an area that, has a lot going on in the creative field, and is up and coming. And so we had Raleigh on the list, and we had Austin. She came and visited an aunt and got a job in Austin. And so I was about ready to take out another fire crew for the summer. And she called me and was like, we need to move to Texas. So I drove from Montana to California, grabbed our stuff, drove down to Texas, and then, we've been here ever since.
Amazing. Well, so a few false starts, but this is kind of taken, right? You've been doing this for quite some time now. What about manufacturing? Like, how did this sneak into your life, and why did it stick?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that I kind of always was interested in and always did. I mean, my favorite thing growing up was working in the shop. I was always like welding random sculptures or building go-karts or that kind of thing, and then working on equipment with my dad. And so making something was just really a part of what I was interested in. And so I just kind of kept coming back to it.
What was the first job that you did? Like how did it all start off?
Originally, we started as a fabrication company, and that kind of went horribly south with my business partner at the time. And so I ended up kind of rolling that up and then going out and working in the oil field. And while I was working in the oil field, I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do that doesn't have me away from home all the time? And so talking to a friend of ours that worked in semiconductor, he said, there's these big parts that we order, they all come out of California, and there's a huge lead time on them. And me, not knowing anything about machining at all, I was like, well, those look like pretty simple. I feel like I could figure those out. So I started to kind of figure out, okay, like we need a machine this big to make these parts, and started looking at, okay, I can't buy a new one. They're like $500,000 because the parts were 40 inches by, 50 inches. And I was like, okay. So I started looking around, and we ended up finding this machine in the oil field that I didn't know anything about CNC machines at the time. A machine, was a machine to me. And so this machine had been rolled into a dirt floor pole barn on drill stem. And so originally I sent my fiance at the time to look at it, and she goes, I mean, it's here. Here's some pictures. And she sends back like, these pictures of a rusty, dust covered machine. So I was like, yeah, the price is right. Like, I can afford it. It's big enough. I'm sure we can make it work. So we buy this thing. We set it on the ground. It was actually so big that we had to build the building around it. And so we get it, hook power to it. It doesn't turn on. And I'm like, okay. So we end up totally rebuilding the thing. I stripped it, actually in the rigging, because I couldn't afford a real rigging team. So I hired a crane to set it. And in the process of setting it with the crane, it had rolled forward and crushed both of the doors. So I ended up rebuilding the doors.
Oh my goodness.
And then stripping it, repainting it, put in a new control, had to do a lot of rewiring because there was a lot of electrical issues with it, but we got it up and running. It worked really well, surprisingly.
Well, all this is under the pressure of you already have an order that you need to go fulfill. So you're like, gotta get this set up.
So we didn't have any orders at the time. It was, they were like, yeah, if you can make them, we'll send you an order. And so I was trying to get this thing up and running, and while still working my oil field job. And so get it up and going, kind of figuring it out. And then at the time I had a friend that he had taken some machine classes in college. And so the idea was, you'll do the business, I'll make the parts. Well, his company called him up and they're like, hey, we need you to move to Maine. And so he moved to Maine. So I had this machine that I didn't know how to run. And then actually got it running while he was gone. And I was like, the first thing I was like, okay, well, I'm going to run my first program on this machine. So I put a cardboard box in the vise, and I'm going to write my name with a marker on the top of the box. And I go to hit cycle start, and the spindle crashes through the box into the table. And I'm like, what just happened? I was like pouring through everything. I'm like, I don't know what I did wrong. I was just so confused, and come to find out the machine was inverted. So anytime there was a G0 was spindle to the table. And so that was the first thing that I did not like fully understand. And then the other kind of, hilarious oversight was I get the machine, and I was like, where's the tool changer? How did these get into the machine? And I was like, oh no, I'm the tool changer. So, luckily most of the stuff we ended up doing on that machine was like pretty simple. It wasn't a lot of tool changes on there, but it was Cat 50. So they're pretty heavy tools. But yeah, that was kind of what started it all. And ironically, the company, as soon as I got it up and running, I was like, I can make parts. And they're like, cool. Yeah. We've got some really small parts we're going to have you start out with. And so I had this gigantic machine that I'm making these little tiny parts, which luckily they gave me little tiny parts, because I think to get 7 parts, I think I scrapped like 30 to get ones that were good. So it actually ended up being a blessing in disguise, but we slowly worked towards where they're like, gave us bigger and bigger things. And as that kind of scaled up, my ability got a little bit better and went from there.
So you had this first business where it went south, but then right away, your intuition was to find another business partner. Didn't work out.
Yeah.
But what about your first experience with your first business partner, and how did that end, and how did that affect kind of your business decisions going forward with this company?
It's kind of the classic thing that everybody tells you is the most important thing you can decide when you're going to business with somebody is plan the exit. Like if somebody wants out, and make sure everybody kind of has their cards on the table and what everybody wants. And so that was kind of what I didn't have wrapped up in, like even understanding what the goal of my first business partner was. And so that's kind of why that didn't work out. He was running a bigger company than mine, and he just wanted to bolt on somebody else to do his fabrication. And he had no intention of us really growing beyond that. And so I had all my eggs in his basket. And when his basket, broke, then mine also broke. And so that was kind of the oversight there. And then, as we transitioned to, version 2.0, I went into it, planning, okay, if this falls apart, which in our situation with my second business partner, it got to the point where he was like, I want to move back to Montana. This isn't what I really want to do anymore. And because we'd kind of put that front end effort on what it actually looked like, it was super straightforward, and everybody, felt good about it. There wasn't any contention, and it was super smooth because we'd already had those kind of conversations on the front end, and it was a pretty simple transition.
For a lot of people, losing a partner that early would have made them reconsider whether they wanted to do it anymore or not. You kept going. Why?
Well, it was one of those things, and he stayed on for a while actually after that. So he ended up coming back and then doing a lot of the machining. And then, again, we kind of got to that point where we grew to a scale where it wasn't what he wanted to do anymore. And, for me, it's like, you just kind of have to always just figure things out. I mean, I just view things as problems to solve. And that's all it is, There's
this book called The E-Myth that talks about how a lot of businesses are started from some technically minded person, a machinist or a plumber that knows how to do their craft really well, realizing they can do side jobs and make more money than their primary job, and they have this business. You're kind of the inverse, right? You are learning machining from the outside in. What what has that journey been like? We have some folks out there saying they can create machinists in 60 days. What's been your maturation process?
I think the important thing, or the I guess my superpower is that I'm not the world's best machinist, is one of them. And so that kind of forces you into figuring out smarter ways to do things. I think one of the classic thing was originally like my business partner in the machine shop, he was always way faster at doing setups than me. And so like he had zero interest in doing 0 points or anything like that. And I was like, no, like it takes me like 15 minutes to get a vise straightened out. And every time I have to pull a vise or whatever, it's just like a huge time suck. So I was always like, we got to figure out a faster way to do that. So I think because I wasn't that good, I was always looking for these ways to help myself out. And that's one of them. And I think the other one is like growing up with a family that ran a business, mainly without any systems. And really it was quite impressive, but my dad ran his entire business like out of his head. And that causes a lot of problems when you try to scale something. And so seeing that firsthand, I was always like, if I do this, it's not going to be like that. I don't want to be the person that has to make all the decisions. Like I like making the high level decisions, but I don't want to have to be there dictating every little thing because I haven't created a system where everybody can kind of like take their own initiative and solve a problem.
Did you have ideas on what that system should look like, or just conditions of like, it shouldn't look like this, it shouldn't look like what I grew up with?
Yeah, I think you figure that out as you kind of test different things out. I mean, originally, especially when we started out, I had an Excel sheet that I tracked everything on, and I tried out multiple systems. And so I think a lot of times too is like you have to continually audit the process that you're using and deciding, does it still work for us? Because at one scale, it's like, like the Excel sheet worked really well, especially when there was like 2 guys in the shop and even 3. And then as you start scaling, that same system doesn't always work well. And you might also have to layer on other stuff, like things that, you don't think of because you just do them. Like one funny one was like when it was me in the shop, we had an air compressor. When I went out and turned on the air compressor, I would always check the oil on it. To me, that was just, I didn't need to write that down. It was just something I did. And like one day when I was like not making all the parts every day, our compressor seized up. And the first question I was like, have you been checking the oil? And they're like, oh, I didn't know I needed to do that. And it's like, you need to, as you scale, like those little things that you do that you think everybody should be doing, you kind of need to codify and make sure everybody knows the process. You can't just make assumptions because people aren't going to know.
Were there examples of systems you introduced to solve a problem that didn't work or didn't work the way that you wanted to?
I think that happens all the time. And I think you just continually improve things and move forward. I'm trying to think. I think one of them that we've like looked at was we built out our own internal anodizing system, and it worked really well. But for our scale, it didn't make sense to have somebody sitting down there waiting for parts to show up. And so we're like, okay, right now that doesn't work. Maybe we'll look at it again in the future. Like maybe we can, automate it. And so we'll look at things like that. But I think you have to, continually be able to look at things and test them out and be okay with something not working.
How do you decide when it's time to make something scalable versus not? Because sometimes if you do it prematurely, you're just adding extra process and bulk and you're wasting time. But if it's too late, things break and you might lose a customer. How do you time that?
I think it's tricky. I think it's always easier to start something earlier than get, too far down the road and go back. I think if you're trying to implement a system, it's better to start it with a small team. And then as you start to scale that system, everybody kind of is already indoctrinated in the system. So each person is just a faster way. It's just how you do it. Specifically, when we brought on like an ERP system, it was something that we'd never used. So it actually took us a while where everybody was like comfortable using it because we hadn't used it before. And now that we have kind of like a whole, group of people that's all they've ever done, that's just everybody just uses it, right? Where initially when we were trying to implement it, it was challenging because your old process is going to be faster. As you're learning something, you're going to be slower using it. And so I think that's often when, people, say something's not working or they fail on an implementation because, obviously it's going to be slower when you're trying to get up and running and train everybody and just kind of have to bite that bullet.
And you just had this kind of wisdom baked into you just from your childhood experiences, or were there other influences too?
I think a little bit from that, seeing how like, not necessarily how you shouldn't do it or like what didn't work. I think, we also, like when I did fires, right? So you have all these layers of command and how things operate at a huge scale. So like, incidents, you'd have, thousands of people working on a shared goal. And if you don't have, systems in place and you can't communicate, like you run into issues. And that's typically the main thing that happens, like when there's a accident or a fatality or something like that on a fire, it's almost always boils down to communication. And so seeing how you embed communication and process and how you do things is super important. And I think from that standpoint, like one of the things that I'm big on is checklists and processes. And one of those things started from being on the fires when you're, not near a hydrant or like you have to draft. And so you have to turn a bunch of valves a certain way. And one of the things that I found was everybody gets really stressed. And typically when you have to draft is when you need to be fast and there's, everybody wants your truck back and everybody's calling you on the radio. And so I'd watch these guys on the back of their truck, like struggling to pull a draft because they weren't turning the right valves and that kind of thing. Because you just see their kind of IQ drop because of the stress. And so one of the things I did is after watching that a couple times, I was like, okay, we're going to put colored tape on all of these valves. And then there's going to be a little card that's like, okay, like if we're drafting, turn all the yellow valves this way, all the blue valves that way. And then they can solve their own problem. And everybody's like, when you're training, you're like, I'm not going to need that card. I don't need the colors. But when you're having an issue and you can't figure it out, having that reference material helps you get through a problem. And I think that same mentality like works out in machining as well. Like if you can kind of break it down. So like if somebody runs into an issue on a machine, like they can kind of run through their checklist and be like, oh, I forgot to do this. That's why that happened, right? You're not relying on this massive knowledge base to complete a task.
But in that case, the people that are coming up with the process, they have to understand the content. They have you had to know how to do the blue and the yellow and the valves and stuff like that, right? Like how do you feel about that? Like when there's a problem that you need to solve, but you don't actually know what's going on, do you get into it yourself, get in the weeds and figure out what to do? Do you have a different method for getting that process created and baked?
One of the big things that I often see is that people try to change too many variables at one time. And so one of the big things, especially in the shop, like if we're having an issue with a part, it's let's not, adjust multiple things. Let's break it down to making one change. Like if you're having an issue with the machine, if the probing is not right, like, okay, let's, address it, like changing one thing at a time. And I think often people just they're they're trying to do the right thing, but they kind of jump at it and they're like, well, I did this and I did this and then all these things happened. And then you don't really know what the source of the problem is, because by the time, like I've come to the table, they've changed so many different things from the first issue that we're not able to isolate it. And so teaching that process of how you kind of make slow incremental adjustments to get to where you need to be, I think is the main skill. I think you can bring somebody up a lot faster if you teach them that kind of process of working through something.
You bootstrapped this business.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? You've grown a ton. Your revenue per employee is great. The success you have, the low amount of scrap and the high level of quality you're able to produce is great as well, especially for someone that comes from outside of manufacturing. What were some of the biggest lessons along the way? And do you wish you took more debt out? Do you wish you had investors? Like, could you have accelerated the business? Or like in reflection, like what were your thoughts about the way that you grew the business?
Yeah, I think what I've always tried to do is make like intelligent decisions and adjusted risk. I think one of the hard things in like manufacturing is, deciding, can I support this piece of equipment? Like, is there a demand for it? And I think one of the things that I've always done is I continually look at, our data on like how we're performing and how each machine is performing. And I think from that standpoint, to me, it just makes sense, right? Like, so for instance, we have a new machine that is like, I think it's like a year old at this point, that we're getting rid of and we're replacing with an automation cell, because even though there's nothing wrong with the machine, I'm looking at the automation cell that we put next to it, and I'm like, for the space that machine's taking up, like it's not worth having here. So we need to put in the right tool so that we can get through our parts faster, right? And so I think, just kind of continually keeping a pulse on the numbers. And I think sometimes like, you as a business owner, you kind of have an idea in your head. You like, unless you look at numbers and actually pull data, like it's often surprising, like, okay, what machine is doing like how much revenue, or what is the most used thing, or what is the bottleneck in the shop. And until, you can really, decipher that, it's hard to make good decisions.
You did see your dad run his entire business through his head.
Mm-hmm.
There's some power in that. Mm-hmm. Do you borrow some of that as well and just judiciously, add systems? Like, are you still trying to keep a lot of stuff in your head as well? Or are you really trying to shove everything into the organization as much as possible?
I try to shove as much into the organization because I don't want to be the bottleneck. I think that is the biggest limiter to growth, is if you have those people that you're in it, like they could be excellent people and they could be really intelligent, but if you have everything based on a key person, like anything could happen to that key person. So that's one of the things that like we're big about here, is that everybody's trained up, and that's not typical. I mean, like we have our, nicest 5-axis machines. Typically, you've got your 5-axis guy, right? Well, we had like a situation like that with one of our previous machinists, and like nobody else knew how to run the machines. And so like if he didn't come in, or if he was late, or if his dog got sick or whatever, that would affect our production. And so now we've kind of grown to the point where we want everybody up to speed so that everybody's interchangeable. And that not only works out for the business, but also works out for the employees, because, they can, take care of a sick kid and not worry about it, or do what they need to do, because, they're not the point of failure, right? Somebody else can easily jump in. And so that's what we kind of try to build into the system.
You got into aerospace fairly recently,
mm-hmm.
about 6-7 years ago. How did that happen? I heard there was a kind of a serendipitous event.
One of our vendors, we had a good relationship with him. He was like, there's this guy, I really think you should meet him. So he invited us up to Chicago. We went to a Cubs game and I was talking to this guy and I was telling him that my wife's cousin worked on the spacesuit when it was at NASA. And he goes, huh, is he a big guy? And I was like, well, yeah, he's like 6'7". And he's like, huh, is his name Tim? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, I was his boss. And so that kind of started the process. And so it come to find out he had, started a private company. They were working on the spacesuit project and it was during the prototyping phase. And so we kind of entered the prototyping phase with the understanding that we would get AS9100 certification, but they would treat everything from the start as if we were AS9100, which was kind of painful in the beginning because we didn't know anything about it. And so it was a good learning process of like what it actually looks like to put together the documentation, to follow everything how you're supposed to. And so that was kind of our like training wheels project.
What was it like starting to do aerospace components, the culture around documentation, around measurement? Was a team able to adapt to it? Did some people have to be replaced? Did you have to hire new people to augment the team? Are you still doing non-aerospace stuff? How does that transition happen?
Yeah, we did have to like level up our team for sure, especially as we got like more into it. And we ended up bringing on more skilled machinists. We brought in a quality manager that had years of experience in it because we kind of got to the point where, we quickly realized that like if this is the path we're gonna pursue, we've got to really dial ourselves into it because you can't really do it halfway. You have to like, they don't care what size you are. They just care that you put everything together correctly. And so you kind of have to make the jump to really focus on it and do it the right way. You can't kind of half do it.
Do you think you're fully there? Like, do you think the culture and the process is ingrained already?
Yeah. I think it was a little painful in the beginning. Just finding the right people that really got it. But I think once you have that right team together, that team wants everybody else to be on the same level. And that's kind of how we started finding people was like, we brought in, our lead machinist that was like, hey, I've got this quality guy that's really good. We should bring him on. And then those guys really wanted to level up everybody else's skill in the shop. So, we're bringing in our machinists to the quality room and showing them, how the CMM works, like how everything connects and relates so that they get better at making parts so that they understand what he as a quality manager is looking for. And so that kind of culture of getting everybody better kind of just helped out a lot.
See. And by now, what percentage of your business is aerospace?
I'd say we're probably 85%.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Awesome. What other lessons do you learn along the way? Is it different selling these companies and working with them? Is the order frequency different? Is working with different engineers from different departments of the same company a challenge? Like what have been the most important things you've learned that have facilitated this transition?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that a lot more needs to go on the front end when you are quoting stuff, especially as I brought on a more skilled quality manager. He would look through their quality documents and he would be like, did you realize what's in this document? And I'd be like, no, what's that? And so I think that where like on the front end, like when somebody sends you that, like you need to read through it and you need to really understand like what their expectations are so that you're on the same page. So that was a bit of a change from, somebody just needs a part and they don't need everything that goes with it. And then it varies from company to company pretty drastically. Like we have some customers that they're, they're just in a hurry and they want their stuff fast. And as long as the, paperwork is there, they're good. And then we have, other customers that they're going to pour through that paperwork and they're going to look for anything that could possibly be wrong. And so I think you just kind of got to, calibrate those expectations. And then especially as you're like, you're quoting stuff or understanding that kind of stuff, you keep that in your mind, like what level am I working? Because like the same identical part sent to one company could take you a lot longer, just on the documentation side based on what their expectations are.
So there's a lot of demand for your capacity and your work, but you guys seem to follow our philosophy at Fulcrum, which is a smaller but mightier team. Do as much as you can with the folks you have instead of trying to maybe hang your shingle or your ego on how many people you have. How does all of that translate into the way that you think about this business? You think about it much more like a system. How do you think about adding machines and how that changes your cost structure? And like, how do you improve the output of every person? Like what, you talked about procedures and processes in terms of systems, but what about scaling in terms of systems, deciding how to allocate resources?
The way that I look at it is I always want to have my team have the best tools that they can have so that they can have the highest output. And, one of the things, we were talking to our accounting team the other day and they're like, well, can we add another shift? And I'm like, yeah, we could probably add another shift or bring on more people. But it makes, from my perspective, like right now we're investing heavily in automation and, I would rather, have a robot work a third shift than have my people do that. And that also if that automation frees my team up to do higher level things. They don't have to sit in front of a machine and load something for hours on end. They can be, programming something or working on, sorting out what's going on with the first article, right? And so making sure that your team has what they need, and then are you leveraging everybody and giving them like the opportunity to do the most output possible, I think.
You also carefully but still aggressively apply all sorts of technology, software technology, CMM machines, robotic automation. How do you crack through all the marketing stuff to figure out what it is that you're actually getting? When I talk to you about different software tools, you have very specific and kind of definitive but not arrogant conclusions about like, well, this doesn't really actually work that well, and this really does work that well, but it doesn't have all the things that we need to actually use it. How are you assessing a new product, and how do you envision it impacting your business, and how do you then sell that idea and get people to understand, hey, your process is going to be different, but here's what it could be in the future? Like, how do you connect all those dots?
I think a lot of it is like, you have to test a lot of different things out to get kind of a feel for where things are or what the expectation is. And I think often, people want to just make a decision and then be done with that. And I think you have to, again, it kind of comes back to continually auditing things and looking at, okay, so we, spend all this time and energy implementing this ERP system, and do we enjoy using it? Like, are we using it? And if we aren't using it, like, why aren't we using it? And what are the problems? And is it just my team doesn't have the right education to use it right? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with that workflow? I mean, because we've gone through that where we implemented an ERP system that everybody I talked to really liked it, and we were really excited about it, but it didn't really fit where we were at the time. And, when we talked about getting rid of it, everybody was like, well, it cost us so much money, and and we spent all this time on it. And I'm like, yeah, but if we're not using it, and you would rather go back to what we were doing before, and we're talking about hiring somebody just to manage the ERP system, that doesn't sound like the system's working very well, and we should look somewhere else. And so I think kind of like that whole thing is like, even with machines, it's like, yeah, these machines they're incredibly expensive. They cost a ton of money to wire, to move, to rig. But, I think if you get beyond that kind of sunk cost mindset of like, yeah, but we spent all this money on that machine, and it's like, well, if it's not making us money, let's get it out of here and let's find something that works better for us. It could work great for somebody else. Let's get it to somebody else, let them make money with that machine. I think again, it's like different systems are going to work for different companies, and so you kind of got to match that with your team, right? And kind of see where they're at, see what they enjoy using and what works.
If there is something where, the old process is just more convenient, more comfortable, but you can clearly see how something is different, how have you found success like selling that to them?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to figure out, is it because we don't want to learn the new system, or does it not work, right? And I think that's where it's a little hard to figure out. And again, it's like, you kind of got to just, watch your team using the system. And if they're like actually using the system, it's still not working, or if they're just reverting back to what they were doing before. So I think those are things you kind of have to talk to your team, observe your team, to kind of get to the bottom of.
So having kind of this failed ERP implementation, then moving on to another one, was there more skepticism, or was the first experience helpful in getting the second one up and running?
I think it was like helpful. I think too, what was, I think, almost more helpful was like, looking at our workflow before that, right? Like, so we had a Excel, like gigantic Excel sheet with multiple pages and stuff like that I developed, and it worked pretty well. And so it was like, okay, well, what was that process? Why did it work well? And why does this other like system not work as well? And like one of the things that we came up with was like, well, like our Excel sheet was kind of like a linear process, where when we went with the other ERP system, there was a lot of like jumping around, and it was like you'd have to have like 4 different tabs open at the same time to kind of sort things out. And we're like, oh, well, that's kind of what's going on here. It's like we can't even just fumble you have to know the system. Like you can't fumble your way around, where if you have a linear progression of how the part gets from like A to B, then you can kind of fumble your way through using the system. And so it's like, okay, well, let's find a ERP system that looks like we can fumble our way through. And that was kind of what we kind of used as our picking different systems as we did the whole thing. You kind of do this speed dating thing where you test out a bunch of different things and have meetings. And I think the hard part is when you're presented with that kind of thing, you get an expert that knows how to, click through everything. And so getting yourself in the driver's seat and trying things out and seeing if it matches how you think and your team works.
You've also made comments about certain technologies like, man, this algorithm or the whatever is inside this technology seems to work really well, but it just doesn't have this or this or this or that. And here's this other technology that just has all those bells and whistles and it just works really well, but the core technology just kind of sucks. Like how do you think about the trade-off? Hopefully that it isn't the case that all these products remain like that forever, but
yeah.
If it was the case, if it was the case that neither of those products improved, one where the core technology is super good, but it just is so hard to integrate, which one would you choose? Like which one would you kind of hook your wagon to?
Yeah, I think, this might not be a great strategy, but one of the things that we do is we are constantly testing things all the time. So like right now we've got multiple CAM systems that we don't use for our daily driver, but we're just kind of keeping a pulse on things. And then we're also building out our own system as well. And so we don't know which one's gonna go the right way. But we're willing to kind of dip our toe in the water and just keep on the pulse of things so we don't get left behind. And I think right now that's kind of super important, especially with like technology adoption and stuff like that. So like
Just because tech is changing so fast right now?
oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you aren't keeping up with things, like even if you keep a pulse on stuff, it's easy to kind of see the direction that things are going. But if you're just going to say, hey, this is how we do things, this is the software that we use, and you're not kind of keeping your eyes open to other things as they're developing, it can be pretty easy to get left behind.
How do you think about the costs associated with it? So as you're dipping your toes into a bunch of different things, that's people's time, that's money. And then more importantly, if you do decide to change something, all those beautiful, valuable processes and procedures could all maybe need updating. And as you get larger and you have more stuff embedded into your system, you know what I mean, that cost gets higher. And a lot of larger companies kind of grind to a halt because the cost of changing all the systems is so high that they just use systems that aren't that great. Like you're a lot smaller than, you know, a 10,000 person company, but how do you feel about those costs?
Yeah, I think that's just kind of the, you know, cost of being on the tip of technology. I mean, I think if you're going to keep evolving, you have to continually just keep, you know, looking at what's out there, and just, you know, build that in as like a cost of improvement, right? And if something clearly isn't working, obviously like cut it. But if you're not willing to have a couple false starts and that kind of thing, then, you know, I think you're going to quickly get left behind.
Looking into the future, we see a lot of things changing in manufacturing in general. We've met a lot of companies where, you know, they're set in their ways. It doesn't matter what who the company is. We're just never going to do anything faster than 20-day turnaround time, and they're losing a lot. Or sometimes customers go from needing one of something to 10,000 of something, and we're just not going to take a risk on expanding capacity. You guys have done a great job servicing your customers, listening to them. You have a part that was launched into space last night. There's a lot of these things that are happening where your ability to understand that lead time is important, that servicing them is important, that being able to respond to them is important, that doing things that feel unscalable at the moment is still important. Where do you feel like you guys are as manufacturing is changing, from my perspective, towards a more dynamic, versatile, agile method of managing the supply chain?
I think it all comes down to being flexible. I mean, we'll go from, you know, doing production runs to doing prototyping, and, you know, just being able to adapt to that and not getting like, you know, super set in like, this is what we do is kind of the main thing. Just being flexible.
And where do you see the company going? Are you going to continue to quadruple down on aerospace? Are there other industries that are interesting? Are there things that you're planning on buying or building?
For us, definitely focused on aerospace. I think historically it's a really strong like market, and I think there's just going to be more demand for it. For us, kind of how I view it here is we'll expand here. So in the future, we're planning on adding on here, and then, you know, maybe opening more locations, that kind of thing. I think right now we're dialing in our system, and I view this as kind of like our incubator and spot that we test things out. And then as we like, you know, expand, like the other locations maybe are like more fixed in like how we do things. But, you know, this kind of exists as our innovation center.
You expect that expansion is still going to come organically, bootstrapped? Are you going to need outside capital? Are you afraid of the influence they might have on you?
You know, it's something I'm exploring right now. So I'm involved in the kind of tech scene in Austin, and so I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm opposed to it. I'm looking into it just so I think I think it would be foolish to say like, I'm not going to do this or that. And so for me, it's really understanding like, okay, what does each one of those growth paths actually look like? And does that match my goals and what I want to do? And does it still give my team the flexibility that I want? And does it take care of my like team as I want to be taken care of?
Well, if there's one thing you go back in time and tell your previous self, or one thing you'd want to tell your future self, what would that be?
I think it goes down to, I think when you're in it, often it's like you have these issues where you're like, oh man, I'm never going to be able to figure this out. And I think what you ultimately start realizing is that if you kind of focus on the things that you can break down and incrementally solve, you'd be surprised where you wind up with in the end. Where, if I would have looked at like what we're doing now and been like, oh, this is what you have to do, like in this period of time, I don't know that I would have like figured that out, but I just kind of approached everything as like one kind of stepping stone to the next. And that's kind of how I view things like going forward. It's like, I don't have to figure everything out all at once. It's like, okay, what is the key thing, key decision that I can make now that is going to make the biggest impact, instead of trying to, hold everything and manage everything all at once, kind of a thing.
Any fears or hopes about this new wave of new technology? There's a lot of crazy stuff happening.
I think it's one of those things that I'm continually like, I think right now it's like, I'm either like, behind or I'm ahead. It's like hard to tell where you're at. Like given the day, I'm like, man, like this new thing came out. I know nothing about it. I haven't even like messed around with it. And then sometimes I'll talk to somebody else and then I'll be like, wow, I'm like way ahead of everybody else in this area. So I think that's the struggle right now, is like things are changing so fast that like knowing where you are on that spectrum is like hard. Like, am I like ahead of the curve or am I behind the curve? Are all these like, up and coming startups going to like wipe us all out with like automation, or like the Tesla bot's going to come out and we're not going to need to hire any more employees. We're just going to have Tesla bots. It's changing so fast that it's kind of hard to, know where you're at.
You seem more optimistic and excited though than dread.
Oh yeah. No, I think it's exciting. I think what I'm excited about is a lot of the technology, I think, is giving the guys on the floor the ability to do more challenging and exciting work, and actually get better at what they're doing, right? So I think from that perspective, it's super exciting. And, I don't think that anybody in the shop gets any particular joy from like loading and unloading parts. So like, if we can eliminate that, that would be great. And so I think like if we have every machine loading itself, that's not going to, take away jobs from my guys. That's not going to hurt the business. It's just going to give us additional capacity to do more. So I think that's how I kind of look at it, is like, all of these new advancements are just going to either help us do more complex stuff and have a higher output.
Amazing. Well, thank you for inviting us out here and taking the time to share your story. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.